All right, let's hope this is the Bible video. Let's hope that it goes without freezing because my camera has been freezing so much tonight. I don't know. I don't know why, but um, so this is Bible. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 20. If you remember, the battle between Absalom and David just ended, and the last chapter we kind of saw everything being sorted out. Among those things were a lot of things like Joab lost his position. David reluctantly gave it to another one of his nephews named Amasa, who had sided with Absalom. And so David gave it to Amasa to kind of appease people and make it seem like he was, a little bit more on their side, because a whole lot of Israel did side with Absalom against David, and Judah was there as well. And we saw a little bit of angst between Judah and the rest of Israel when David came back in, and Judah gave David a celebration and didn't invite the rest of Israel, or Judah didn't invite the rest of Israel. So we saw David had mercy to Shimei and everything like that. So we're going to start chapter 20, verse 1. It happened there to be there a rebel whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And he blew a trumpet and said, "We have no share in David, nor do we have an inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, O Israel." So this happened in the aftermath of the war. Is that David had all of this stuff happen, and all these people had been on Absalom's side. Then Absalom was killed and the war was over, but the people were like, well, we just all rebelled against David. They're probably not that happy to jump back with him. They wouldn't necessarily be like, all right, let's go right back to with David again. That's not the case. And so these people, led by this guy named Sheba, decided that they didn't want any part of David. They don't want him as their king anymore, and they kind of rebel. And so they have now a rebellion going against, and they want to battle against David. So now he's another battle that he's going to have to go against. And jumping down to verse 4, the king says to Amasa, who now, this guy Amasa is his new general, he says, "Assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and be present here yourself." He tells him, all right, get the men of Judah together, let's go, and I want you to be here as well. And so Amasa tells him, and he tells Amasa, that he wants to get everybody ready, get the whole army ready within 3 days, give a time limit. Notice, he doesn't make the same mistake that Absalom made, in that, because Absalom was like, let me give some extra time. Instead of attacking right away, Absalom gave some extra time because he thought it would make him have a bigger army. Sorry, it is now 10 of midnight. He'd make him have a bigger army, and David didn't worry about that. David wanted very quick action right away. So he says to Amasa, get the army together within 3 days. But verse 6, verse 5, but he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. So he wasn't good. He didn't do the job well. Amasa wasn't doing very well here, and he wasn't like Joab. Joab has lots of faults, his violence being one of them, his vengeance being one of them. He doesn't really like to listen to people. He does whatever he wants. But he was a good general. He did get results, and so they're in shambles right now. The army isn't really together. And David in verse 6 says to Abishai, "Now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do more harm to us than Absalom." He's like saying, basically, he's like, man, we got to get it together, or else this guy Sheba is going to do more harm than Absalom did. And so he tells he tells Abishai. Abishai is his nephew, brother of Joab, who's always by his side. We've seen him a bunch so far. Abishai, take my servant and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us. So this guy Sheba is trying to get people together and trying to gather up troops, and he's trying to go to escape to a fortified city and kind of gather up some troops together to fight against him. And he sends Abishai with troops to go chase him. And so Verse 7, so Joab's men with the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men went out after him, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba. And when they were at a large stone, which is in Gibeon, Amasa came before them. And so Amasa ends up showing up to battle, and he's not even in charge anymore. He was supposed to be in charge and get everybody together, and he failed, and yet he decides to show up anyway. And decides he comes in, and he's like, "Oh, hey, is everybody here?" And he kind of shows up at the battle in battle armor and stuff like that, as if he was in charge, but he didn't even get everything together. He didn't want to miss out on the battle. And Joab, good old Joab, I'll give you one hint of what he's about to do. Amasa took his job. So what do you think? And it's his cousin. Amasa's his cousin, but he took his job. So what do you think he's going to do? So they go in verse 8. Joab was dressed in battle armor. Amasa showed up. Hey guys, how you doing? Joab was dressed in battle armor, and on his battle armor was a belt with a sword fastened at its sheath at his hips, and as it was going forward, it fell out. So as he was walking toward Amasa, he happened to drop his belt with the sword on it. Oh, sword's gone. It's okay. I'm coming to say hi to Amasa. So I'm not armed anymore. I have no sword. See, my sword fell off. So Amasa kind of lets his guard down and sees Joab. And Joab says to Amasa, "Are you in health, my brother?" And he leans in. It says he took his beard, him with the beard by the right hand to give him a kiss. You know, the way that societies back then they did the kiss on the cheek kind of thing. And so what they would do is that they would kind of take hold of the beard. It was like a sign of affection. Take hold of the beard and give the guy a kiss. It was kind of like, a kiss on the cheek kind of thing, which we don't do in our society, but it's normal for other societies. And it was a sign of affection. So he grabbed it at the side of his face with the right hand to give him a hug, essentially. It was like what we would do, like, we slap hands and pull in to give one of these kind of hugs. You know how in our society we do that. It's as if he's doing that. Like grabs his hand, pulls him in for a hug, but when he does, Amasa doesn't notice. He's got another sword. And so good old Joab pulls him in, "Hey, come on in," and stabs him right in the stomach. And so it struck him right in the stomach, right in the gut. And it says his guts poured out onto the ground. And he didn't strike him again. He only hit him once. And it's kind of a gory detail. And a lot of these details make it so that we know the Bible is true, because it includes these details that I don't think somebody would think to include if they were just writing a made-up story. Because what ends up happening is in verse 11, Joab says, "All right, come on, everybody whoever favors Joab and whoever's for David, let's go, let's follow Joab." So Joab basically just kind of makes himself in charge, and he calls the troops himself and starts walking. But Amasa is still sitting here, and this is the details I'm talking about. He kind of is still sitting there dying. It's not a quick death. And he's dying over a long period of time, kind of by the side of the road. And as all the people are going past to go follow Joab, they all kind of are stopping and seeing Amasa, and they probably feel bad. They feel awful. This is a man of Israel dying there, and they all are stopping, kind of looking at him. He's like, "Come on, let's go." And then the next group comes up, and they see him, and they're looking at him, and it's really bothering them, as it would bother anybody. And so some of Joab's men went and covered Amasa with a garment and moved him into a field and put a garment over him, kind of cover him over so that people wouldn't see him anymore, and they just keep going. Again, if there was a made-up story, why would they include details like that? It's called corroboration in the writing business. It's corroborating story. So they go and they come to a city called Abel. Is a city in Abel of Beth Makkah, whatever, how you pronounce that, in verse 15. And so this guy, Sheba, has escaped into the city. The city has walls and everything. And has escaped in, thinking they're going to protect him. And so they started, and they cast up a siege mound against the city, and it stood by the rampart. And they basically started sieging the city, battering the city to throw it down. And a siege is a really terrible thing for a city to go through. It's really bad for all the people of the city. And there's this woman in verse 16 who says it calls her a wise woman, and she's very wise. She sees what's going on. The army of Israel's besieging the city, attacking the city, and she calls over to the general. She said, "Who's the general?" And they say, "Joab." And she kind of calls over and says, "Can you go get Joab for me?" I don't know if she's like how she came out of the city or whatever, but she goes and calls for him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm Joab." And he comes over, and she's like, "Why are you besieging the city?" And he's like, and he explains to her. He says, because she's basically saying like, "Hey, we used to have a good relationship, Israel, and this city of Abel has been a great city and everything, and why do you want to destroy our city?" And he's actually saying, "Well, I don't want to destroy your city." He goes, "I actually would rather not destroy your city if I don't have to. But you see, we're attacking your city because you are housing a guy in it that we're after." And she's like, "Oh, we are? Who is it?" And he said, and he explains to him, this guy named Sheba and he explains to her the whole situation. And the woman said, "We'll take care of it." And so she goes back in the city, and the guys stop attacking. They just kind of stand back. And after a little while, Sheba's head became separated from his body and was thrown over the wall. And she was a pretty wise woman, because she's like, the people of the city were like, "We don't care about this guy Sheba. He's a rebel from Israel, and they're seeking here to kill him. I mean, we're not gonna die over this guy who we have no clue who he is, and we're not gonna protect him for any reason." And they were like, "Yeah, well," and so Sheba thought he was gonna get protected in the city and could hide out, but they were like, "Nope, we want no part of this," and they tossed him over. So Sheba's rebellion was over. And let's skip forward to chapter 21 now, 2 Samuel 21. And now there was a famine in the days. Actually, before I start, I'm going to get water. Give me 10 seconds. Sorry, that was more like 15. I apologize. Maybe 20. And anyway, so all of a sudden there becomes a famine land. We're going forward in time longer and longer. David's getting older and older, but there's a famine in the land at this point. And a famine for 3 straight years, which is a long time to be no food or water, because usually there's not water in a famine either. But who knows, maybe there's water. But there's no food at least. Usually when there's a drought, there's a famine too. Not necessarily, if there's a famine, it's not necessarily a drought. But all right, there's no food. And so after this, it's determined that this wasn't a normal famine that would happen normally. David inquires in verse 1, inquires of God and says, "What's going on, God? You promised us that you'd take care of us, and this isn't just a short famine. What happened? What do we do?" And God says, "It's because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites." Let's rewind. So if you remember, there were a group of people called the Gibeonites back in the book of Judah. These were the people, if you remember, you got to remember back. They were people who came to Joshua and said, "We'd like to make a treaty." And they had all shoes that were all worn out, and they were, all dirty and everything. And they said, "We'd like to make a treaty with you guys." And Joshua was like, "Well, we're not supposed to make treaties with anybody in the land, so our God won't let us make a treaty with you guys. Sorry, guys. Because if you guys were, our God told us we have to, wipe out these people in the land because they were, doing awful things, and we're bringing God's judgment." And they said, "Well, we're from far, far away. We're admirers from far, far away. I mean, look at our shoes. They're all worn out. And look at our packs and all these things. And our clothing are all worn out." And Joshua's like, "Oh, well, I guess you're right." And he doesn't inquire of God. And it turned out the Gibeonites were right around the corner. They were one of the people that God told Israel to wipe out. And so God's like, "Well, now you have a covenant with them. Can't do anything about it now." Well, it turns out Saul, it's not recorded in the Bible, but Saul must have at some point in time had a whole slaughter of a bunch of Gibeonites. It's not recorded anywhere, but obviously by the context we can tell he took some attack on the Gibeonites. And that was way, 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 way long ago. God is very patient. Think about that. God expects some retribution to happen because Saul did this thing. Saul broke Israel's promise because Israel made a covenant. Israel said, we promise not to wipe you guys out and not to attack you guys and kill you guys. And then Saul did it. And here's why God takes it so seriously, because the way Israel acts is Israel is bringing God to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world are learning about God through Israel and certain things that they would learn. Okay, God takes this seriously. Okay, God is merciful. God is this, God is that. Well, from this exchange with Saul, it would look like God can break his promises. Saul promised that he would not attack the Gibeonites. Sorry, Joshua promised that Israel would not attack the Gibeonites. Then Saul attacks the Gibeonites. God does not do well with broken promises and misrepresenting him. So he was waiting for something to happen, and no one ever took care of it. So he brings a famine, and David's like, what's going on? He's like, you broke a promise, and you haven't dealt with it. Well, David didn't break a promise, but Saul, and thereby Israel itself broke a promise. So God's like, you got to deal with that. We got to fix it. And so David's like, oh man, we got to fix it because Saul unjustly killed the Gibeonites somehow. He murdered them. So he calls the Gibeonites and speaks to them in verse 2. And it says, now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. So they weren't even Israelites. They were part of the Amorites. The children of Israel had sworn protection to them, and Saul had sought to kill them in a zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. So Saul was trying to kill Israel's enemies. He killed the Gibeonites, murdered them, but God had protection against them because Israel had that. So Saul was wrong in that. So David comes to the Gibeonites and says, hey guys, a while ago, Saul killed a bunch of you guys, a bunch of your people, and he was wrong for doing that. I'm trying to make it right. What can I do for you? How can I make atonement? How can I fix what's wrong? And there were many ways in the law to make atonement. Think about it. If you were to steal something, you had to make a sacrifice, but you also had to pay back 4 times as much in many situations, sometimes 10 times as much, but 4 times as much usually. If you stole something or you broke something irresponsibly, you had to pay for it. If I stole $10 from you, I had to give you $40 back. And that was the way I'd made retribution. That was the way I made things good. So David comes to the Gibeonites and doesn't say to them, here's what I'll give you. He just says to them, what can I do to make it right? And that's a good way to go about it. It's, what can I do? And it puts it in their court because it kind of gives them the power rather than saying, all right, listen, this is what you're going to get, and you better be happy with it. Because then they don't feel like it's a true apology. So the Gibeonites answer back, we will have no silver or gold from Saul or from his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us. So he said, whatever you say, I'll do for you. They said, we don't want money. We don't want you to kill a person. We don't want you to go into Israel and kill somebody for us. And so he goes, okay, what do you want then? The Gibeonites said, as for the man who consumed us and plotted against us, let 7, which is Saul, let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we'll hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose. And so basically they say, we want 7 of Saul's descendants. And this, as gruesome and terrible as it sounds, is actually a pretty appropriate punishment, because in this society, in the Old Testament society and back then, it was the avenger of blood, meaning if someone killed a relative of yours, then you would have the legal right to go and kill them because they were a murderer, and you have the legal right to require their blood for that. And so David goes and he goes, all right, that's fair. And so he grabs 7 of the descendants of Saul, making sure, it says in verse 7, that he spares Mephibosheth. He doesn't want Mephibosheth to be part of it, but he took 2 sons of a guy named Ritzpah, the daughter of she's one of Saul's concubines, and 5 sons of 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Mahalathite. So she was actually 5 sons that she had while she was not married to David, which kind of stinks. But 7 descendants of Saul he brought and gave them to the Gibeonites, and the Gibeonites required them, and they killed them as retribution for what Saul did. And so Ritzpah, though, who was one of the wives of Saul at one point, she actually goes and over the next few verses she protects the bodies because the way the Gibeonites were, they just left them outside, didn't bury them, because it was a statement of saying, like, this is retribution. And so she sits there and she kind of keeps the like birds and buzzards away from them and stuff like that. It says until the rains came, which was indication that the famine was lifted. And when the rains came, it was indication that the famine was over. So David sees that it works, and he honors this woman Ritzpah, who had taken so much honor in protecting these 7 bodies. And so David took these 7 bodies along with the bones of Saul and Jonathan, and he has this big ceremony in honor of these men. And it was really unfortunate for these guys. I mean, I think it's pretty sad that these guys didn't even do it, but they were affected by it. But remember, I always say, your sin always affects those around you. And Saul's sin for breaking that covenant affected his descendants. And then verses 15 through 22 to finish up the chapter, basically they go into battle, and the Philistines go and attack Israel again. And there were even giants. They had giants back in battle. And David was actually fighting against one of the giants. And it said he grew faint, he grew weak and weary, because David's getting old at this point. He's an older man. And it says one of the giants, the weight, his bronze spear is 300 shekels. I don't know how heavy that is, like 40 pounds or something. And thought he could kill David. And he came up and he's trying to kill David. But Abishai comes to David's rescue, and he killed the giant. And it was a close call. David almost died. And so Abishai and all the men were like, David, you can't go out to battle anymore. I know you love going to battle, but you're just getting too old, man. And they told him he had to go back. So from here on out, David is, too old for battle. I don't know how old exactly he is, but he's probably in his 60s or maybe in 70s. Who knows? He's getting up there. He can't really hack it anymore. And so, but the rest of the chapter is all about David's men killing various famous Philistine giants. So it's interesting, though, that David's men, David was a giant slayer, giant killer, and David's men, who, remember, these guys were originally the ones that were the disheartened, the discontented, the guys nobody would really want. They became valiant, mighty men who were slaying giants, just like David did, because the leader, a good leader, will make those who follow him better. And that's what David did. And that's it for today.